and welcome to my channel, Cat the Romantic. Today I'm going to be doing my first official book review. I know, it's exciting. I feel like I haven't really actually been a booktube channel up until this point, but today I'm going to do my first ever actual booktube review. And of course, I can't just review any old book, so I've decided to go with one of the more popular books that's going around booktube right now, A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. If you haven't already read the A Court of Thorns and Roses trilogy, I highly recommend that you do so, or that you become familiar with it before you watch my review, because, well, this book is like all basically spoilers for the entire first trilogy. This book is in many ways primarily a romance, I would argue. It definitely has plenty of those fantasy aspects from the previous 3 entries in the series, but I think that there was definitely a lot more romantic and sexual content in this book. So, yeah, this was a pretty steamy book, guys. A Court of Silver Flames follows Nesta Archeron, Feyre's oldest sister. So at the start of this book, Nesta lives in the Night Court with Feyre, Elaine, and the rest of her family. However, for months and months and months, since the end of the war, she has been living apart from them. Every night, she goes out and drinks until she's drunk and brings home strange men to have sex with. Everyone in her life sees that she is at rock bottom. One of the key plot points of the previous books that really comes into play in this book is that Nesta and Elaine returned into Fae by the Cauldron. And it was implied in the previous series that Nesta acquired some supernatural abilities from the Cauldron in addition to her Fae immortality. At the start of A Court of Silver Flames, Nesta is a character who is in really, really bad shape. In the finale of the previous trilogy, Nesta, Feyre, and Elaine's father died in a really, really horrible way, and Nesta was there to witness it. Since the previous books as well, Nesta and Elaine have been really, really struggling to come into their own as Fae. The adjustment from being a human to being forced to be something else was a highly traumatic one for both of them in very different ways. So Feyre and Rhysand basically implement a full-on intervention. They tell her that she can either train with Cassian, live in the House of Wind, and work in the library, or they're going to boot her back to the human lands, where she'll probably die because she's Fae. This is just an incredibly tough version of tough love here. And because she's left with virtually no choice, Nesta agrees, even though it's very reluctant on her part. Of course, however, living and training in the House of Wind with Cassian means that she and Cassian are on very close terms. In previous books, Nesta and Cassian were constantly at one another's throats, and the sexual tension was so high. So it's pretty obvious that the two of them are kind of secretly crazy about one another, though Nesta is really, really not in a good place. And since they first met, there's definitely been some complications in terms of getting a relationship started. A lot of fans of the series really did not like Nesta in the original trilogy, and a lot of them thought that Nesta was actually an abusive character to Feyre. And Feyre and Nesta, over the course of the original trilogy, had a very fractious relationship. Feyre and Nesta were both born into a very wealthy family. Due to some unwise business decisions on the part of their father, they were thrust into poverty at a very young age. And all 3 of the Archeron sisters, Feyre, Nesta, and Elaine, had very different responses to their newfound poverty. Nesta and Elaine, who remembered life before when they were richer, tended to resist their poverty more, whereas Feyre, who was the point of view character for the previous 3 books, was the one who was really the breadwinner for the family. Nesta in the original trilogy is portrayed as a very angry and vindictive character. She seems to truly resent the turn that her family's fortunes have taken, and she seems to take that out on almost everyone around her. She hates their father, she seems to hate Feyre, and throughout the entire series, she tends to be a really, really harsh character to be around. So coming into this book, a lot of previous fans of the series had a lot of reservations about Nesta being the heroine of this series. To be completely honest, despite her characterization in earlier books, I never really hated Nesta. I always saw her as a character who simply expressed herself in a different way, and while she certainly did some things that were not great, or was complacent when she really should not have been, I was not so quick to write her off. In many ways, A Court of Silver Flames is a redemption story. It's about Nesta having to face herself and her past and what she did to her sisters and the people around her throughout her life, and also come into her own power. I really enjoyed Nesta and Cassian's relationship. I was already in love with Cassian from the previous novels. He's just such like a fun character. He comes off as like pretty bullheaded, but in reality, he's a pretty smart guy. But he just doesn't have, you know, kind of the courtly manners to pull a lot of this stuff off. Nesta, on the other hand, is completely vicious and is amazing at all of the courtly nonsense. And I love how over the course of this book, it kind of contrasts these two characters and it shows how they kind of compensate for each other's weaknesses. They always have this kind of fun rapport where they're just like sniping at one another. But at this point in the series, it's pretty obvious that both of them actually really care for one another. Cassian is obviously more open about it than Nesta. You can tell like there's some serious like chemistry there and that they both care about one another, but Nesta keeps pushing people away. Of course, like this is one of those relationships where it starts off where they're just where it's just a physical relationship, and then to no one's surprise, it eventually escalates into actually admitting feelings for one another. But, you know, given the history these two have, it's so ridiculously complicated. And throughout this entire process, Nesta is building herself back up from the ground up. She's undergoing a period of, you know, rapid reassessment and change where she has to come to terms with a lot of harsh realities about herself. And the entire time, like, Cassian is supportive, but also draws some pretty healthy boundaries in terms of, like, he's not going to deal with a lot of her bullshit, and he's also going to push her to confront these things. I was really on board with this romance, and there is kind of, like, a twist about their relationship that I was not super surprised about, because given, like, how these two have been, like, orbiting one another for, like, 3 books now, I kind of suspected, and it was great to have that confirmed. But as soon as that plot point got revealed, I was just absolutely entranced. Like, I forgot everything else that I needed to do that evening, and I just finished this book as fast as humanly possible. One of the things that I'm not as big a fan of in Sarah's writing is, for some reason, I don't always get into her romance scenes super well, but she really stepped up to the plate in terms of making this a more adult romance. Let's just put it that way. I didn't count how many sex scenes there were in this book, but there were a lot. I would give this book a Steaminess rating of probably like 4.5 out of 5. I haven't really established a solid scale for that, but because of how explicit a lot of the scenes were and how many of them there were, I would put it pretty far up there. It wasn't like some other books that I've read, which are like 90% people banging, but like, there's a lot of banging in this book, people. So be aware of that going in. There's some sex scenes where I was really on board for it, and I was enjoying myself, and some where I was just like, I don't know, like, do we have to read through this whole sex scene? This is definitely one of those books that does not skimp on a lot of the details if you're into that sort of thing. As much as I am a massive fan of romance, one thing I love more than romance is romance with intense character development. The reason I read Sarah J. Maas is not because of the romance. One of the things I really enjoy in most of her books is the way that she writes character development. Her character's development is usually cathartic. It takes you like 50 to 75% of the book to actually start warming up to and loving her characters. But when you get to that point, and when that catharsis happens, it feels very powerful. Sarah's way of making you care about her characters is that she introduces you to a character that is not particularly likable. She did this with Selena in the Throne of Glass series. She did this, I would argue, with Feyre in A Court of Thorns and Roses. I didn't particularly like her in that first book, and she does it again here with Nesta. Sarah then takes these slightly unlikable characters, delves into their pasts and darkest fears, and then essentially puts them in a situation where they hit absolute rock bottom. But from this point, you get to see this character grow and blossom and learn more about themselves. Sarah definitely follows the writing advice of torture your darlings. She takes characters, gets you attached to them, and then she tortures them. That is also something that happens in this book to Nesta. One thing I find really interesting about the way that Sarah decided to characterize the three Archeron sisters is that each of them reacts very differently to trauma. When Feyre is put in a corner and she's at her lowest, she's the character who fights. She's the one that tries to survive. Nesta, on the other hand, is someone who experiences something bad and channels that into anger and spite. Nesta has this sort of fierce stubbornness to her, where she would rather do something to spite you rather than admit that she's weak. In A Court of Silver Flame, it becomes obvious that this is a really toxic coping strategy, and her coping strategy is now failing in the worst possible way. Her trauma feeds her anger, and her anger feeds her trauma as she pushes those she cares away. In my personal life, I have seen and experienced many people's reactions to trauma. Nesta's strategy is something that is very real, and that very real people use to the detriment of themselves and the people around them. Nesta starts this book as a very closed off and very angry character. I thought the picture that Sarah painted of the really complicated feelings Nesta had towards herself and her actions, and the feelings of rage and guilt and self-loathing and jealousy and feelings of being out of place were so eloquently drawn together. And I feel like Sarah's redemption arc for Nesta addresses a lot of the major points of that, where she has to not only make up for what she's already done, but she has to learn how to move forward. And she has to learn how to accept the love and care of those around her and to not lash out, and also face the ways that she has failed to do that in the past. So that was something that I really appreciated. There's definitely moments in this book where I felt the emotion, I felt the pain, and where I wanted to cry as well. It took me to definitely about more than halfway through this book before I felt that I was really starting to be compelled by Nesta. So I was a little bit skeptical as to whether or not she would be able to win us over. There was a good portion of this book where, Nesta was still failing to open up and failing to progress in a lot of ways. I just wanted to reach out, grab her by the shoulders and shake her and tell her the world cared about her and that she doesn't need to be so bitter and mean all the time. But what was so satisfying about that was that by the end, I was totally on board with new Nesta. I felt like that transition had been earned because she had been slowly inching towards that over the course of the entire novel. Sarah J. Maas does not ignore a lot of her transgressions against Feyre and other people in her life. A large part of what Nesta has to overcome is knowing that she said and did horrible things to people that love her in the past and having to come to terms with that fact. It also really illuminates her contentious relationship with Feyre and how she feels that people in her life are constantly taking sides when it comes to their relationship with Feyre and herself. This sort of dynamic really hits home personally for me, and what was so wonderful about this book for me is that it's about pulling yourself out of that mindset. And the motivation for Nesta to do that comes not just from the people around her, but also herself wanting to change. And I think that that was a really good choice when it came to Nesta's sort of redemption arc in this book, because firstly, they really needed to address that she had caused harm to people around her. But I also think it was really powerful when she was slowly finding her way out of that mindset. One of the things I really appreciated about this book is that it's not just a romance between her and Cassian. There's plenty of that, and scenes where they confront one another and Cassian forces Nesta to face parts of herself that she has been avoiding. But what I really enjoyed about this book was that there was also a solid grounding in the friendships that Nesta makes with Emery and Gwyn. And in this book, it's made pretty clear that Nesta is a victim of sexual assault. It's not described in detail, but in the timeline of the previous books, there was a man she was considering on marrying who attempted to assault her. And it's implied that this is something that haunts her. One of the things I really enjoyed about this book is that Nesta finds people that she relates to that have been made to feel small in the world, and together they form a really close friendship. I thought the idea of looking for these 3 ancient artifacts was really, really interesting. There was definitely some like amazing scenes in regard to like getting all of these objects of power. And there was also a point about halfway through when they're in the bog looking for the mask. And this is when she is fighting off the Kelpie and it looks like she's not going to make it. And Nesta like rises from the water like a warrior queen. I basically wanted to like jump and throw confetti because that was a moment where Nesta had decided that she was going to stand up for herself and that she was going to stop being a victim. And of course, you know, so much of this book, she still has to wrestle with a lot of things that she's dealing with, but that was a real, like, yes moment that I really enjoyed. I liked their encounters with Eris, the somewhat duplicitous heir to the Autumn Court, who I found really, really interesting. I think that what they're definitely implying at this point is that there's some good to him, but how much good is actually there is not super clear. They also introduced what is probably going to be one of the villains for the rest of the series, which is Koschei, the sorcerer who turned Vassa into the Firebird and is one creepy mofo. So I'm interested to see what happens next. I also thought delving into the kind of crazy powers she has that she stole from the Cauldron is super, super interesting. For example, the fact that she like accidentally enchanted a bunch of blades is like actually like ridiculously rad. And I love that she and her friends decided to like basically resurrect a warrior order of women Valkyries. I thought that was so damn cool. And I'm really, really excited to see what they do with that in the future. Like, I can totally imagine like Nesta like leading an army of Valkyrie warrior women in the future. And I think that is completely badass. I was really on board with the climax of the story where Nesta and her friends are trying to make it through the Illyrian trials, and then it ends up with a battle between Nesta and the Queen, who has enraptured Cassian using the crown. And there's this really insane moment where Nesta like completely unmakes this woman out of existence. Like, that entire part was badass. And the part where she's, like, defending the past was also just a major yes moment for me. It was so awesome. And when I first started the book, I assumed that, you know, the search for these items would be kind of protracted over the course of, like, multiple books like it was in the original trilogy. And I was kind of surprised that that plot ended up wrapping up in this book. I don't know if it was because I just read the end of this book super quickly, but for me, the resolution of the book felt a little bit rushed. I think that might have been partly due to my odd expectation for some reason that this was going to be part of like a multi-part book series, when in fact the, you know, acquiring of all 3 of these objects of power occurred in the same book and culminates in this kind of final scene. The part of the book that I was a little bit more conflicted about was the whole Feyre pregnancy subplot. And I guess it's technically part of the main plot. I didn't have an issue with the fact that Feyre and Rhys are having a kid. That's like super exciting. The part that I didn't like was that, you know, having this baby would essentially kill Feyre because of the wings. And this is just kind of like a suspension of disbelief problem for me. The idea that like they haven't figured out how to do like a C-section in this world, despite the fact that they have like all these crazy kinds of magic and they have like a lot of seemingly advanced pieces of technology. And I was reading this book and I was theorizing the whole time that, like, they would come up with some sort of solution to the problem of Feyre getting killed in the process of labor. It just... I wasn't entirely happy with Nesta having to essentially give up the majority of her power in order for the book to resolve the way that it did. There was some kind of weird choices around that whole thing where it was like the solution was to like just change Feyre and Nesta's anatomy, which was kind of like, okay, that's a little weird. Kind of squicks me out the slightest bit, but okay, I've seen weirder things in romance novels. I don't know if it's just because like the theorizing part of my brain was coming up with all of these theories on how they could save Feyre and the baby. Like, for example, I was thinking, like, maybe they could use, like, some sort of magic, like the type that Rhys uses to change his wings, or Feyre's shape-shifting magic to make it so that she could give birth safely. In my head, like, there had to be, like, some sort of, like, magical fix to this that was not what ended up happening. And I was just a little bit disappointed that, like, there wasn't a breakthrough in that vein, or it didn't exactly go that way. And I definitely see, like, the point of Nesta having to make a choice about the lives of Feyre and Rhys and the baby in those final moments. And it was genuinely touching to read the love she had for Feyre and hearing her have to acknowledge how afraid she was of losing her sister. But I think the reason that it rubbed me a little bit the wrong way is I hate to see characters who are really, really powerful and have amazing magic and see that power get taken away. So much of this book was, begin to kind of like hint at the true depths of Nesta's power. And I feel like we never really got a huge payoff for exactly what Nesta could do. Like, she does that really cool thing where she completely unmakes the queen, and she, can also create rad enchanted blades and, like, give sentience to this house, and she's basically got the power of creation. And she's basically got the same power of creation and destruction as the Cauldron does. And I was, like, 100% there for ridiculously powerful Nesta. Like, I was there for Nesta to, like, conquer the planet. So when she decided to give that up, I was a little bit, like, frustrated. It was like, no, like, you can find another way. Like, you can save her at the same time, but also, like, not give up almost all of your power. I really wanted to see a moment where Nesta, for once, actually confronts the power she got from the Cauldron. Because throughout this entire story, the power that she'd gotten from the Cauldron remained something that she didn't have the greatest amount of control over and had not really obtained complete ownership over, in my opinion. And I really would have loved to see a scene, or just more than we got, of her kind of mastering that power and becoming death herself. I was a bit disappointed when that ended up being the resolution. But at the end, they hinted that she retained some of the power, and she also might have some ties to, like, a freaking goddess. So we'll see where it goes from there. I'm also really, really interested in seeing some cute baby antics going forward. Feyre and Rhysand now have just, like, an adorable kid. So I can't wait to see all of the characters interact like that. I think I would die if there was a scene of, like, stoic Asriel, like, holding this adorable baby. I feel like Rhysand would completely dead-ass refuse to let Amren babysit their child because, like, even though Amren's not as dangerous now, like, she's still pretty dangerous. Like, I wouldn't completely trust Amren with my child. And I say that very affectionately. I love Amren. That will certainly be an interesting thing to see. So I'm going to be really curious to see what happens going forward, and whether or not future books will follow Nesta, or if they're going to follow Elaine or some other characters, possibly Asriel and Elaine. I don't know. I'm not going to start shipping anyone quite yet, because I want to wait and see what Sarah chooses to do with these characters. And one thing I'm also really curious to see is how Nesta does in the future with kind of maintaining the changes that she's made in herself. She did a lot of the work necessary in this book to work on those relationships, but it's hard. You have to sustain these changes over time. I still want to see, like, Nesta with her "I will slay you" grin, and I want to see her be like a badass Valkyrie on the battlefield, looking like death herself. Like, I am there for that. I also desperately need fan art of Nesta as death. I'm sure there's some out there. I've been avoiding like spoilers for this book like the plague on Instagram and social media, so now I can finally like dive into all of that. And it's going to be so cool to see all of the stuff that people have already made for it. One thing I love about Sarah J. Maas is that she constantly pulls the rug out from under me. She did it like 5 times in the Throne of Glass series. I honestly don't know how she still managed to do that in like the same series consistently. Like, there were entire books that were just chock full of twists and turns that I never saw coming. So I'm really interested to see where she goes with this series. Thank you for sitting through my like probably criminally long review of this book. I'm relatively new to booktube and I don't know how to be concise yet. Also, I just have a million thoughts about these books and Sarah J. Maas, so I'm clearly going to have to review like all of her book series at some point. There's definitely some serious criticisms that can be leveled against Sarah J. Maas as an author and some of her tendencies when it comes to her writing. And more importantly, the fact that her books are very white and they don't have a huge amount of diversity in them. But at the same time, these books for me are very comfort food. They have a lot of emotionality to them, but also they're, you know, somewhat lighthearted books about romance, adventure, fantasy, and allow me to kind of escape the world for a moment. So I would classify these as fun trash. And when I say fun trash, I don't mean that in the derogatory sense. I mean trash as in, like, this is my trash. These books are really fun. They have a lot of emotionality and surprising amounts of depth. They're full of drama, they're full of action, they're full of fantasy, but at the same time, they don't take themselves too seriously. You get plenty of joking, you get plenty of, like, honestly, wonderfully gratuitous steaminess, and I absolutely love that. That is what I am here for. I would probably rate this book as about 4.5 or 4 out of 5 stars. So those are my thoughts. Thanks for watching my channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe and drive engagement with the algorithm if you enjoyed this. I really appreciate anything you can do to make sure my channel gets recommended to more people and that more people see my videos. I'm a really, really small YouTuber at this point, as in like, I have like probably 0 subscribers at this point, or like maybe if I'm lucky I have 5. I'll probably like edit the number up there so that everyone can see how tiny my YouTube channel is. I mean, that doesn't hurt my ego. I honestly don't know why anyone would be watching this video at all. So anyway, that's my review of Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Silver Flames. Please tune in for my future reviews and stick around so that I can review the rest of the series, as well as the entire Throne of Glass series in Crescent City and like everything. So please stick around. I'll see you next week with a new video. It might be about books, it might be about media, it might be whatever other obsession catches my interest. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching my booktube channel, and I hope to get to know you. That sounded a little bit too personal. Hello, stranger on the internet. I hope to get to know you. Okay, I'm definitely gonna cut that part out. That's way too creepy.